My name is Vonda, and I am 33 years old. I still remember the exact moment I realized my mother-in-law had stopped seeing me as a human being. It was not during one of her usual cold comments at dinner or when she corrected the way I arranged the table in my own home. It was a Tuesday evening in November when she gathered every member of her family in her living room, her 3 daughters, their husbands, my brother-in-law Greg, his wife, 2 aunts, and my husband Trevor, and announced that she wanted to hold a vote about me. I was standing just outside the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of teacups I had been asked to bring out when I heard her say it. Her voice was steady, almost practiced, like she had been planning this moment for weeks. She said, and I remember these words perfectly because they never left me. Should Vonda be banned from family events? She did not lower her voice. She did not glance toward the hallway. She simply said it out loud like I was a rule being debated in a meeting room and not a woman who had spent 9 years loving her son, raising his child, and building a life alongside this family. I stood there frozen, the tray trembling slightly in my hands, and then every single one of them raised their hand, every last one. I did not drop the tray. I still do not know how I managed that. I placed it quietly on the side table in the hallway, walked back into the kitchen, and stood at the sink with the tap running so nobody could hear me trying to breathe. My chest felt like it had completely collapsed. 9 years. 9 years of holiday meals, birthday celebrations, hospital visits, baby showers, and school performances, and every hand in that room went up without a single moment of hesitation. What truly broke me was not even the vote itself. It was what happened roughly 20 minutes later when my son Caleb came to find me in the kitchen. He is 8 years old and he has his father's eyes and my stubbornness. When he walked in and looked at my face, he already knew something was wrong. He tugged my sleeve the way he always does when he wants my full attention and said, "Mom, why are they doing this?" His voice cracked on the last word. He had been sitting in the hallway. He had heard everything. I knelt down right there on the kitchen floor and held him. I did not cry in front of him. I saved that for later, much later, after he was asleep. But in that moment, holding my son while the sound of Trevor's family laughing floated in from the living room, something inside me went completely still. Not the kind of stillness that means you have given up, the kind that means a decision has already been made. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I was not a difficult daughter-in-law. I am not saying that to paint myself in a good light. I am saying it because it matters for everything that comes after. I cooked for that woman during her knee surgery. I drove her to every follow-up appointment because Trevor was working and none of her daughters stepped up to help. I organized her 60th birthday party, booked the venue, arranged the seating, and ordered the specific cake she wanted from a bakery 40 minutes away. I did all of that while working full-time as a medical billing coordinator and raising Caleb almost entirely on my own because Trevor travels for work 3 weeks out of every month. The tension between us had been growing for years, but it was never about anything real. It was always small things. She did not like how I dressed Caleb for church. She felt I was too straightforward when I spoke. She once told Trevor directly in front of me that I had no softness. What she actually meant was that I did not shrink when she wanted me to. I did not reshape myself into whatever version of a daughter-in-law existed in her imagination, and she never forgave me for that. The vote was simply her way of making it all official. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that 3 weeks before that evening, I had already visited a family attorney. Not because I had been planning anything dramatic. I went because Trevor and I had been quietly discussing separation for months, and I needed to understand where I legally stood before things became complicated. My attorney, a sharp and focused woman named Ms. Caldwell, had already begun pulling together paperwork, financial records, property assessments, and documentation of the informal loan Trevor's mother had given us years ago, the one she had always used as quiet leverage over me, but had never put into any written agreement. That Tuesday evening, sitting on the kitchen floor with Caleb in my arms, I sent Ms. Caldwell a single text message: "Move forward." I did not fight back that night. I did not walk into that living room and say a word to any of them. I bathed my son, read him his bedtime story, turned off his light, and went to sleep. I let them have their vote. I let them believe it meant something. But the following week, a letter arrived at their door from a law firm, and what was inside it silenced them completely. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. I know this because Trevor called me at 9:47 in the morning, and his voice carried a tone I had never once heard from him in 9 years of marriage. Not angry, not defensive, but shaken. The voice of a man who had just discovered the ground beneath him was far less stable than he had always assumed. He said, "Vonda, my mother received something in the mail. I told him I was aware." He went quiet for a long moment and then asked why I had not told him. I said, "Trevor, your entire family raised their hands to remove me from family events while our son sat in the hallway and listened to every word. I do not owe anyone a warning." He had no response to that. Ms. Caldwell had sent a formal legal notice covering several things at once. The first addressed the informal loan his mother had given us 4 years earlier, $32,000 that had never been written down, never given an interest rate, and had been used repeatedly as emotional control whenever she wanted to remind me of my position. Ms. Caldwell had drafted a clear repayment structure and proposed a legally binding agreement that would turn that vague arrangement into a formal loan with proper terms. No more gray area, no more power hiding inside that money. The second part outlined the division of marital assets in the event of a separation, including the equity built in our home, Trevor's retirement savings, and a business profit-sharing arrangement he had entered 2 years earlier, none of which his family appeared to have realized I had complete legal knowledge of. The third part, which apparently caused his sister to put the letter down and walk out of the room, was a formal notice regarding defamation, a family gathering held in front of multiple adult witnesses at which I was publicly declared unwelcome and voted out of my own family circle could reasonably be argued as organized damage to my reputation. Nothing was being filed yet, but everything was being recorded, and they needed to understand that clearly. His mother called me that same afternoon. It was the first time she had dialed my number directly in over 2 years. Her voice was careful in a way it had never been with me before. She said she hoped there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I let her finish speaking. Then I told her calmly, without any trace of satisfaction in my voice, that there had been no misunderstanding at all. I had been standing in her hallway. I had heard her ask the room whether I should be banned. I had watched every hand go up. My son had heard it too, and he had cried. And that was the part I would never move past. She began saying something about how the evening had become emotional and things were taken out of context. I told her that a vote was not a matter of context. A vote was a choice, and I had simply made one of my own. What followed over the next several weeks was not a dramatic courtroom battle or a screaming match at a family dinner. It was quieter than that, and in some ways much harder. Trevor and I sat down together without his family present and had the most honest conversation we had shared in years. He was not the villain in this story. I want to say that clearly. He was a man who had spent his entire life managing his mother's emotions and had never fully seen the cost of that pattern until he watched it laid out in a legal document. He cried during that conversation. So did I. We talked about Caleb. We talked about what we each genuinely wanted versus what we had both been silently putting up with for a long time. It was not a full reconciliation, not right away, but it was real in a way that nothing between us had been in years. His family's behavior shifted almost immediately after the letter arrived. The aunt who had raised her hand the fastest, a woman named Rosette, who had always spoken to me as though I were hired help, sent me a text saying she hoped we could move forward. His sister, who had organized the seating at that meeting as though it were a formal proceeding, suddenly developed a strong interest in Caleb's school schedule and began mailing him cards. I did not respond to any of it with anger. I did not need to. I had already stopped needing their approval, and that specific internal shift was the most powerful thing that happened throughout all of this. Not the letter, not the legal notice. The moment I stopped caring whether they accepted me. Caleb asked me one evening, about a month after everything, whether we would still be going to Grandma's house for Christmas. I told him the truth as gently as I could, that things were changing, and that wherever we spent the holidays, I would make sure he felt completely loved and safe. He thought about that for a moment the way he always does when he is working something out. And then he said, "Good, because I did not like how they made you feel, Mom." 8 years old. He saw everything. I am not going to tell you my life became easy after that Thursday letter arrived. It did not. There were difficult months, hard legal conversations, and long nights where I questioned every choice I had made. But I never once regretted sending that text to Ms. Caldwell, not for a single second, because what I learned through all of this is something I want every woman hearing this to take in fully. Silence is not the same as being weak. And patience is not the same as giving in. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop explaining yourself to people who have no intention of ever truly hearing you, and let your next move speak for itself instead. They held a vote to push me out of the family. What they never realized was that I had already decided to rise completely above them, and that choice, quiet, deliberate, and entirely my own, shut them down in a way no argument ever could have.